The tension in the air was palpable as I stood frozen, watching the HOA Karen spray something in the direction of my service dog. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. My heart raced as I watched my dog freeze, its body shuddering from the sting of whatever she had just used. The world around us seemed to slow, and for a moment, all I could hear was the sound of my own breath and the confused whimpers of my loyal companion. But before I could react, the sudden sound of sirens cut through the air. The HOA Karen's eyes widened in panic as the officers arrived, and then, in a voice that sent chills down my spine, one of the cops said, "You just committed a federal crime." The blood drained from her face as she realized the gravity of what she'd done. My heart pounded in my chest as I watched her crumble, knowing that the consequences she never expected were about to come crashing down on her. What happens next? You won't believe how this ends. It was just another typical morning, calm and peaceful. The sun was shining through the windows, casting a warm glow over the living room as I got ready to leave the house. My service dog, Max, was beside me, as always, loyal, attentive, and ready for the day. He'd been my constant companion for years, helping me through the challenges of my disability. Every step I took, Max was right there, guiding me, keeping me steady, and providing the kind of emotional support that only a dog like him could. As I adjusted my jacket, he sat patiently by the door, his ears perked up, as if he knew it was time to go. He was more than a dog, he was my lifeline. But there was one person in the neighborhood who made everything feel uneasy, the HOA Karen. She was notorious for stirring up trouble, always nitpicking and finding reasons to complain about everyone. She'd given me issues before, even though I had every right to be there with Max. She'd argued that service animals were too disruptive, that they weren't really necessary, and that I was somehow breaking the rules by having him with me. I'd tried to reason with her, but it was clear she wasn't someone who liked to be challenged. Most of the other neighbors were just as fed up with her. She had an issue with every little thing, from the color of our door paint to the length of the grass in our yard. But that morning, she crossed the line in a way no one could have expected. As I stepped out of my front door with Max by my side, she was there, standing on the sidewalk, glaring at us with that same, unapproachable look. I had a bad feeling the moment I saw her. Little did I know, this was the day she would go too far. As I approached the curb, Max and I took our usual route, down the street towards the park. The sun was just beginning to warm the pavement, and the morning seemed like any other, but something felt off. My instincts kicked in, and I could sense Max's unease. His body tensed beside me, his head turning toward the woman standing at the end of the driveway. It was her, HOA Karen. The same woman who had already caused enough trouble for the neighborhood, but today, I had a feeling things would escalate. She was standing with her arms crossed, her expression unreadable, though I could see the flicker of something beneath her rigid demeanor. As I walked closer, she stepped forward, blocking the path. "You really think it's okay to have that dog with you everywhere?" she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "What makes you think the rules don't apply to you, huh?" I stopped in my tracks, taken aback. "He's my service dog," I replied calmly, though I could feel my patience starting to wear thin. "And we're going for a walk. Please move aside." But she didn't budge. Instead, she scoffed, shaking her head. "You and your little crutch, always relying on that animal. It's pathetic. You don't need him. I've seen you before, and you're perfectly fine without him. Don't think I haven't noticed." I felt a wave of frustration wash over me. I wasn't looking for an argument, I just wanted to get on with my day. But she was relentless. She leaned in a little closer, staring at me with eyes that burned with judgment, then slowly reached into her purse. My heart skipped a beat. Something about her motion made my senses scream. I instinctively stepped forward, trying to put some distance between her and Max, but it was too late. Before I could react, she pulled out a canister, a small spray bottle. In one swift motion, she aimed it directly at Max, spraying something into his face. Max yelped in surprise, stepping back and pawing at his face as the liquid hit him. His eyes went wide, and I could see the discomfort in his body language. My heart dropped to my stomach, a mixture of fear and anger rushing through me. I immediately shouted, "What the hell is wrong with you?" The woman stood there, grinning as if she had just accomplished something. "It's just a little spray. He'll be fine," she said dismissively, as if she hadn't just attacked my dog. But Max wasn't fine. He staggered back, his movements jerky as he tried to shake the discomfort off. I felt panic surge through me as I knelt to check on him. His eyes were wide with confusion, and I could see the distress written on his face. He was trying to breathe, but something wasn't right. I knew I had to act fast. I grabbed my phone and called 911, barely able to steady my hands as I explained what had happened. "She sprayed my service dog. I need help. He's in pain, and I don't know what she sprayed on him." My voice was shaking with anger and fear as I spoke to the dispatcher. In the background, I could hear Karen's voice, still taunting, still pretending like this wasn't a big deal. The dispatcher assured me that help was on the way, and I could hear the sirens in the distance. My eyes never left Max as I gently tried to comfort him, wiping his face with a cloth I pulled from my bag. He was still struggling to breathe, his body tense and trembling. I kept telling him he was going to be okay, but deep down, I wasn't sure. Karen, however, seemed unfazed. She crossed her arms again, standing taller, as though she believed nothing would happen to her. "You're overreacting. Dogs are just animals, right? You're making a scene for no reason." My blood boiled as I stood up. "You don't get to hurt him, and you certainly don't get to walk away from this. You've crossed a line, and you're going to pay for it." The sirens grew louder, and within moments, 2 officers arrived on the scene. I turned to them, the rage in my voice barely contained. "She sprayed my service dog. I don't know what's in that bottle, but it's not okay." I glanced down at Max, who was still visibly shaken, his breathing shallow. The officers took one look at the situation and immediately approached Karen. The look on Karen's face shifted from defiance to disbelief as one of the officers spoke to her. "Ma'am, you've just committed a federal crime," he said, his voice steady, but with an edge that made Karen visibly freeze. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words caught in her throat. The realization hit her like a ton of bricks: what she had done wasn't just cruel, it was illegal. She had assaulted a service animal, and under federal law, that was a serious offense. Her face drained of color, and she took a step back, her eyes darting around, looking for a way out. But there was no escape. The other officer called for backup, and soon enough, it became clear that Karen's world was about to come crashing down. But before she could say anything, I stepped forward, making sure to keep my voice steady. "I'm pressing charges," I said, locking eyes with her. "You will pay for this." Karen tried to stand her ground, but she couldn't. The officers had already begun taking her away, and as she was cuffed and escorted to the patrol car, I couldn't help but feel a small sense of victory. Max was still hurting, but justice was beginning to take shape. She might have thought she could get away with hurting my dog, but today, she'd learned the hard way that actions have consequences. As the officers surrounded Karen, I could feel the tension shift in the air. The chaos that had ensued moments ago seemed to settle, replaced by an eerie calm. The 2 police officers were calm, collected, and efficient, almost as if they had been expecting this exact situation. They didn't waste time on pleasantries. One of the officers, a seasoned veteran with a deep voice, approached Karen first, his hand resting lightly on his holstered gun. "Ma'am," he said, his tone colder than I expected, "you've just committed a federal crime." I could see the color drain from Karen's face as the words sank in. Her earlier bravado, the smirk she wore when she first sprayed Max, was gone. She blinked in disbelief, as if she thought she'd heard him wrong. "What?" she stammered, her voice rising with panic. "What are you talking about? It was just a spray." A harmless spray for dogs. The officer didn't flinch. You sprayed a service animal, ma'am. That's a federal offense. Karen's eyes darted to me, then to Max, who was still panting heavily, his body shaking slightly from the residual effects of the spray. She opened her mouth to argue, but nothing came out. The realization was slowly dawning on her. A different officer, one with a calm demeanor, stepped in. Under the Americans with Disabilities Act, service animals are not just pets. They're legally recognized as extensions of their owners. Attacking a service animal is a serious crime, and it doesn't matter if you were trying to teach him a lesson or if you thought he was just an animal. You've violated the law, and you'll face consequences for it. The words hit her like a ton of bricks. She opened her mouth again, this time as if searching for something to say, but her voice was faltering. The confidence she once held had been completely stripped away. Karen was no longer the woman who had assumed she could do whatever she wanted, unchecked. She was a person facing serious legal repercussions, and she was starting to understand the gravity of what she had done. I watched her as she stood there, frozen. The officers moved with efficiency, preparing to arrest her, reading her rights. Karen didn't protest anymore. She didn't argue or try to weasel her way out of it. It was as if the air had gone out of her sails completely. The defiance was gone, replaced by pure fear. And for the first time, I saw her for what she really was, a coward hiding behind her privilege. While the officers dealt with the formalities, I turned my attention to Max. The feeling of dread hadn't left me yet. My loyal dog, my companion, still looked distressed, his eyes wild, unsure of what had just happened. I crouched down beside him, murmuring words of comfort, though I wasn't sure who I was trying to reassure more, Max or myself. He licked my hand, as if trying to tell me that he was okay, but I could still see the effects of the spray in his eyes. He wasn't completely fine, but I knew he would recover. The officer returned his attention to me. We've called an animal control and a vet tech to make sure your dog gets the care he needs. But let's talk about this crime. The charge for attacking a service animal is federal, and you could face prison time or a hefty fine. There's no excuse for this kind of behavior. At that moment, Karen tried one last attempt at deflection. You're overreacting. It's just a dog. Why should the law care so much about it? The officer didn't entertain her argument. It's not just a dog, ma'am. A service animal is a vital part of someone's life. You can't just attack them without facing the consequences. People with disabilities rely on these animals for everyday tasks. They're not pets, they're partners in survival. If you had any understanding of what that meant, maybe you wouldn't be standing here today. I thought about the law for a moment, about why harming a service animal was such a grave offense. Under the Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA, service animals are granted special protection because they are more than pets. They are working animals trained to assist individuals with physical, mental, and emotional disabilities. Attacking a service animal is not just a matter of cruelty, it's a violation of a person's rights, of their ability to live independently and safely. For many people with disabilities, their service dog is the difference between functioning in daily life or being completely dependent on others. The ADA's protection of service animals is not just about physical injury, it's about the violation of the trust and bond that a service animal and their handler share. By harming the animal, you're not just causing harm to the dog, you're potentially putting the handler's entire way of life at risk. That's why the law takes this so seriously. As the officer finished reading Karen her rights and began walking her toward the patrol car, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. It was a strange feeling, but there was no denying it. This woman, this Karen, had tried to break me and my dog. But she hadn't won. The law was on our side. And with that knowledge, I felt stronger than I had in a long time. I wasn't just a victim here. I had fought back, and now, she was going to face the consequences. She'd thought she could get away with it. But now, she'd learned a hard lesson. there were no exceptions, no shortcuts. In this moment, the law had finally caught up with her, and there would be no escape. As the officers took Karen away, I felt a strange sense of empowerment that I hadn't expected. Standing there, watching her being escorted to the patrol car, the feeling of being helpless and afraid had finally started to fade. What I had once feared, retaliation, further harassment, the emotional toll of dealing with someone like her, no longer loomed over me. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't just the victim of her cruelty. I had stood up for myself, and more importantly, I had stood up for Max. And that felt like a victory, no matter how small the moment seemed. I stood tall, looking at the ground where Karen had sprayed my dog, feeling a mix of disgust and pride. The adrenaline of the confrontation slowly began to wear off, replaced by a deep sense of clarity. What had happened wasn't just about the attack on Max. It was about more than that. It was about justice, dignity, and fighting back against the injustice that had plagued my neighborhood for far too long. It was about proving that no one could treat another person or animal with such cruelty and get away with it. This moment was bigger than just Karen and her attack on my dog. This was about holding people accountable for their actions, regardless of how much power they thought they had. And as I stood there, still trying to calm Max down, something unexpected happened. One by one, the neighbors began to gather, first just a few, then more, until it felt like the entire street had come out to witness what was happening. There was a sense of solidarity that I hadn't anticipated. Most of them had been silent witnesses to Karen's behavior for months, some even years. Her petty grievances, her constant attempts to control and bully others, they had all seen it, but no one had ever taken a stand. Everyone was afraid of the consequences, afraid of the way she'd react, and most of all, they were afraid of being targeted by her next. But today, something had changed. My stand, my decision to not let this go unchallenged, had inspired something in them. It started with Mrs. Lopez, who lived across the street. She had always been kind, but she'd kept to herself, never getting involved in neighborhood disputes. But there she was, walking toward me, a look of determination on her face. "You did the right thing," she said quietly, looking from me to Max. "She's been a nightmare for everyone here. We're all tired of it." Her voice cracked slightly, but there was strength behind it. Then, Mrs. Patel, the woman from 2 houses down, nodded, joining the small group. "My daughter had to deal with her too," she said, her voice firm but quiet. "I was afraid to say anything before, but now it's time." A few others followed, until the small crowd of neighbors began to grow. The sense of unity was palpable. People who had once been afraid to speak out were now banding together, ready to hold Karen accountable. They had seen the way she had tormented me, and now they were ready to stand with me, ready to ensure that she faced justice for her actions. It felt surreal to see the support from those who had once kept their distance. One by one, they shared their stories, the times Karen had bullied them over trivial matters, the threats she had made, the ways she'd tried to control their lives. But today, none of that mattered anymore. The power had shifted. It wasn't just my fight anymore. This was the neighborhood's fight. As I stood there, listening to their words, I realized something that made my heart swell with pride. I had sparked something. A simple act of standing up for myself, for Max, had created a ripple effect. The fear that had once kept everyone in their corners was dissolving. The courage that had been locked away in silence was starting to come to the surface. And that moment, standing there in the middle of it all, I realized I wasn't alone in this fight anymore. The crowd grew larger as more neighbors trickled out to support us. People who had always been quiet, people who had always stayed out of the drama, were now vocal in their support. They were ready to take a stand, ready to make sure that Karen was held accountable for everything she had done. Together, we made sure that her actions wouldn't just fade into the background, overlooked and ignored. We were going to ensure that she faced the consequences, not just for the attack on Max, but for the many other instances of harassment and abuse she had inflicted on the rest of us. When the last officer left, taking Karen away, the air felt different. It was like a weight had been lifted, not just from my shoulders but from the entire community. Everyone stood a little taller, breathed a little easier, and for the first time in a long time, the fear that had once controlled our lives had been replaced with hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, things could change. As I looked around, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. This wasn't just about getting justice for Max. This was about something much larger. It was about reclaiming our lives from the fear and intimidation that had kept us silent for so long. And now, as the sun began to set and the neighborhood slowly began to quiet down again, I knew that I wasn't just walking away from this incident as a victim. I was walking away as someone who had helped ignite change, who had shown others that standing up for what's right can be contagious. I turned to Max, his tail wagging slightly as he seemed to sense the shift in the atmosphere. "We did it, buddy," I whispered, crouching down to give him a gentle pat. "We're not alone anymore." Even though Karen had been arrested and escorted away in handcuffs, her defiance wasn't finished. It wasn't over yet. As the officers ushered her into the back of the patrol car, I could hear her muttering under her breath, trying to get her bearings, still unwilling to accept what was happening. She tried to regain some form of control, her mind scrambling for a way to shift the blame, to convince everyone, herself included, that she was the real victim in this situation. "I didn't do anything wrong," she yelled, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and outrage. "That dog was dangerous. It was just a little spray, and now you're making it into a federal case? I didn't hurt anyone. This is all your fault." She looked at the officers like she was expecting them to suddenly side with her, as though they'd been waiting for the opportunity to declare her the victim. But the officers were unmoved. They continued their work, checking the spray canister she had used on Max and recording her statements, but their expressions were impassive. It was clear they weren't buying her story. "You can say whatever you want, Karen," one of the officers said, his voice calm but with an underlying firmness. "But you sprayed a service animal, and the law doesn't care what you think about it. You don't get to choose which rules apply to you. You broke the law, and now you'll face the consequences." Her eyes widened, her face turning red with anger. "This is absurd," she screamed, her voice growing louder. "You're all against me, aren't you? I should never have even been arrested. It's not a big deal. You've got to let me go. This is ridiculous." But the officers didn't flinch. They kept their distance, their demeanor unaffected by her outbursts. They had seen this behavior before, people who couldn't accept the reality of the situation, who were trying to manipulate the situation to their favor. But Karen wasn't going to get away with it this time. She wasn't going to talk her way out of it. The officer in charge, who had been leading the arrest, stepped forward. "Ma'am, you've made a huge mistake. This isn't just about an argument with your neighbors. This is a federal crime. You assaulted a service animal. What you did was cruel and illegal, and there's nothing more to say. Your words won't change that." Karen fell silent for a moment, as if the finality of the officer's words had pierced through her self-imposed delusion. For a brief moment, she was quiet, perhaps finally grasping the severity of her situation. But then, her defiance flared again, the fight not yet finished in her. "I wasn't trying to hurt anyone," she spat. "I was just trying to teach him a lesson. That dog was in my way. You can't let people like him think they can get away with everything." She waved her hand towards Max, who was now being attended to by animal control officers, his once shaken body starting to calm down as the vet tech worked to ease the effects of the spray. The officer shook his head, a cold expression settling on his face. "You don't get to decide who deserves compassion and who doesn't. You don't get to decide who gets hurt and who doesn't. Your actions are the reason we're here today. You made that choice, Karen. Now, you're going to have to live with it." Her anger reached a fever pitch as she lunged toward the officer, a desperate attempt to break free of the reality that was closing in on her. "You can't do this to me," she shouted, her voice thick with disbelief. I'm going to sue all of you. I'll make sure you all regret this. I'll tell everyone about how you let me get arrested over a dog. You'll all pay for this." But no one was intimidated. No one was moved by her threats or her bluster. Karen was, at this point, a cornered animal, trapped in the web of her own actions, scrambling for a way out, but with no escape. She could yell, she could shout, she could make empty threats, but the reality of the law and its consequences were bearing down on her, and there was no getting out of it. The other officer, who had been standing silently beside Karen, now stepped forward. "Karen, I think you've misunderstood the situation. It's not about a dog. It's about the fact that you took an action that endangered a person's safety, a person's livelihood. You hurt something that was irreplaceable to someone. And now, you're going to answer for it." For the first time, Karen's bravado seemed to falter. The words hit her in a way the others hadn't. She stood still, her shoulders slumping, her body suddenly tired from the emotional roller coaster she had put herself on. There was no escaping what she had done. She couldn't charm her way out of this one. The law wasn't on her side, and her words couldn't erase the damage she had caused. And in that moment, standing there in front of the officers, surrounded by the support of my neighbors who had come to see this through, I felt a sense of finality settle in. The truth had come out. Karen's attempt to manipulate, to lie, to play the victim had crumbled in the face of reality. She had been exposed for what she was, a bully, a coward, someone who thought they could get away with anything. But today, that wasn't going to happen. As the officers continued to process the details, taking her statements, and preparing to transport her to the station, I took a deep breath. The fight wasn't just mine anymore. It was all of ours. We had all been victims of Karen's cruelty in one way or another, and now, the scales were tipping in favor of justice. This was a moment of victory, not just for me and Max, but for everyone who had ever been intimidated or silenced by people like Karen. When the officers were done, they turned to me, confirming that the investigation would move forward, and the case would be handled with the seriousness it deserved. The officers reassured me that justice would be served, and that they would make sure Karen was held accountable for the crime she had committed. It wasn't just about me. It wasn't just about Max. It was about making sure this didn't happen to anyone else. As Karen was driven away, a powerful sense of closure settled over me. The confrontation was over. The standoff was finished. The justice that had seemed so out of reach just hours ago was now a reality. And in that moment, I stood victorious, knowing that standing up for what's right, for what's just, had made all the difference. The fear that had once controlled me, that had made me second-guess myself, had vanished. It had been replaced by something stronger, the knowledge that doing the right thing always wins in the end. The days that followed felt surreal. Karen's arrest had sent shockwaves through the neighborhood, but it was the aftermath that truly began to unfold, revealing just how much had changed in such a short amount of time. It wasn't just about what had happened to me and Max anymore. It was about the collective sense of empowerment that was slowly building. Karen's legal battle was far from over. While I had hoped the situation might resolve quickly, the legal system had its own pace. The federal charge for assaulting a service animal wasn't something to take lightly, and Karen soon found herself facing a series of hearings, each one more serious than the last. Her once unshakable confidence had evaporated entirely as she realized the depth of her mistake. Her efforts to downplay the crime, to accuse me of overreacting, fell on deaf ears as the court proceedings made it clear that no one, not even someone like her, was above the law. The judge issued a statement that echoed in my mind long after the trial: a service animal is more than a pet. It is an essential part of the person it serves. Attack one, and you attack the person's right to live independently and with dignity. I had been nervous at first about how things would play out in court. I wasn't sure what would happen to Karen, what the consequences would be, or even what the legal ramifications might look like for me or Max. But as the weeks went on and the trial proceeded, I began to feel a sense of calm. I knew I had done the right thing, and that feeling of righteousness was enough to steady my nerves. The prosecutor had no trouble proving Karen's guilt. Witnesses from the neighborhood came forward, corroborating the chain of events, including the officer's reports and the evidence gathered from the spray canister she had used. Karen's own defense, while aggressive, wasn't enough to turn the tide in her favor. It was a long, drawn-out process, but in the end, Karen was sentenced to a significant fine and a probation period during which she would have to attend anger management courses. The judge also issued a restraining order, ensuring she could not come within a certain distance of me or my property. The legal system had done its job, and it had done it well. But as I walked out of the courtroom, I didn't feel victorious in the traditional sense. What mattered to me most was that justice had been served, and Karen's actions were no longer allowed to linger in the shadows, unchecked. While the legal matters were unfolding, I turned my attention to Max. His recovery was slower than I'd hoped, but each day brought improvements. He had been through so much in those first few hours after the incident, but the love and care he received from me, as well as the vet's attention, had brought him back to his usual self. His spirit was as strong as ever. He was still the loyal, protective companion he had always been. Every time I looked at him, I was reminded of just how important he was, not just for the practical help he gave me, but for the emotional support he provided without ever asking for anything in return. Service dogs are not just animals, they are lifelines. They give us a sense of independence that we can't find anywhere else. For people like me, they are not just companions, but partners. Max was my eyes when I couldn't see clearly, my balance when I struggled to stand tall, and my courage when I needed to stand up for myself. That bond was unbreakable, and this incident only solidified it. What Karen failed to understand was that Max wasn't just a dog. He was part of my life, my family, and no one had the right to take that away from me. But beyond that, I began to reflect on something much deeper, the community support I had received. The neighbors who had once been quiet, who had been too afraid to speak up, now stood behind me in ways I could never have expected. It wasn't just about them showing up that day to support me in the moment. It was the ripple effect of courage and solidarity that followed. As the news of Karen's actions spread through the neighborhood, other residents began to speak out about their own experiences, their own fears, their own stories of dealing with her abuse. Many of them had been too intimidated to do anything before, but now they were standing up. The same people who had avoided confrontation were now taking active roles in their community, ensuring that no one would be able to push them around anymore. What had started as an isolated incident between Karen and me had transformed into a larger movement, a movement of people reclaiming their power. I realized that by standing up for myself, I had unknowingly empowered others to do the same. What seemed like a small act of defiance in the moment had become the catalyst for a change in mindset. No one should have to live in fear of people like Karen, and now, my neighbors knew that they didn't have to. I had never anticipated the power of that moment. I hadn't expected the neighborhood to come together in such a way. But as I sat down one evening, reflecting on everything that had happened, I understood something profound. Standing up for yourself isn't just about the outcome, it's about the example you set. By refusing to let Karen's actions go unchecked, I had set a standard for my community, a standard that said, this behavior will not be tolerated. We will protect one another. We will support one another. And we will never again let fear dictate how we live. Looking at Max, I felt a deep sense of gratitude. For him, for the community, and for the life I had fought to protect. The road ahead wasn't without its challenges, but I had learned that no matter how daunting the obstacles, there was always a way forward. The world may be full of people who think they can get away with cruelty, but there are just as many people who will stand up, who will fight back, and who will ensure that justice is done. And no matter how long it takes, no matter how hard the journey, justice has a way of finding its way through. I had seen it for myself, and I knew it would never be taken for granted again. Max nudged me with his nose, as if to say that everything was going to be all right. In that moment, I realized that the real victory wasn't in what had happened to Karen. It was in the knowledge that we had won something far more important, the strength to stand up for ourselves, the courage to act, and the unshakable belief that when we do what is right, no one can take that away from us. As the days passed and the dust began to settle, I couldn't help but reflect on everything that had happened. What started as an act of cruelty against Max had turned into something much bigger, a reminder of the power we all have to stand up for what's right, to fight back against injustice, and to never back down when things get tough. In moments like these, we often forget how much strength lies within us. We don't always see it, but it's there, waiting for the right moment to surface. This was that moment for me, and for my community. We had all stepped forward, each of us doing our part to ensure that no one, not even someone as powerful as Karen, could get away with cruelty. Standing up for justice isn't always easy. It takes courage, it takes resilience, and it takes the unwavering belief that what's right will always prevail in the end. And while the legal system did its part, the real victory was in the way we found strength in each other. We showed the world that when we come together, when we fight for what's right, we can make a difference. No matter the odds, no matter the obstacles, justice has a way of finding its path. If you've ever felt like giving up, like the fight is too much, remember this: sometimes the law is on your side, and when you stand strong, even the toughest can be held accountable. If you've been inspired by this story, if you've ever felt the weight of standing up for something that matters, then hit that subscribe button. You don't want to miss the next chapter, the next fight, and the next lesson in the power of standing up for what's right. Because no matter where you are, or how alone you might feel, you're never truly alone when you choose to stand tall. Keep fighting, and always know that justice is just a step away when you have the courage to seek it.